Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to dive right in because we've got an express session here. Never really done a 30-minute webinar before, so we'll see if it works. But why don't we start over here, because I think this is a good way for us to just kind of get primed. Quick question for the group, and feel free to drop in the chat. Please be informal and conversational. This isn't a formal poll, but I'm really interested. How many of these things do you use a month? Is it 2, 3, 4, 9? To my research, the average amount that a person uses is about 7 social media or streaming or entertainment services. If anyone is a Spotify user, I know that Spotify is doing its wrapped up event right now, always kind of a key moment of the year. But I wanted to really flag this because I think it's important for all of us as compliance leaders to understand the world that we live in. And the world that we live in is just a highly curated world. For any of you who use any of these, you know that you have made a custom version of any of these platforms for yourself by a series of liking, not liking, this targeted ad is not relevant to me, these are the things that I'm interested in. And that makes it really interesting in terms of who we are and certainly how we learn, because this digital world around us, this is our everyday. We likely use one of these every single day, forget in a single month. And so when we think about the world that we've created for us, and we are so good at curating the things that we want and we like, and only have room for the things that we want and we like, how does that work when we have to deal with have to content? And one of the key questions that's been on my mind, certainly in preparation for this presentation with all of you, is coming in that world that we just mentioned about how we go through all these different services every single day. How does have to operate in our predominantly want to, highly curated world? When I think about this from a compliance training strategy, mandatory training has just never felt more mandatory. And the sort of the equivalency that I would make to it is, think about your social media feed, and you're kind of scrolling, you're swiping, and then all of a sudden you see something that doesn't stand out. That doesn't make sense as part of your feed. Why? Because that's probably a targeted ad. And you're really quick to know when something is not part of your feed. And sometimes mandatory training has that illusion to us, where there's a have to component in our want to world. This is a challenge for all of us in how we navigate it. And hopefully today we can leave you with a few tips for how you navigate that world better, because this is the world that we live in now. But first, just some quick introductions on my side. Hey everyone, my name is Josh. I'm the Chief Creative and Learning Officer at Sponge Group. Had a bunch of roles in my career, working with a lot of industries and topics. But more than anything, my role, I find, is to really help organizations and leaders transform how they view learning, and certainly as a catalyst for impact, especially in the lens of compliance. Some quick facts about me. That's a picture of the greatest meal I've ever had in my life. It's a ramen shop in Tokyo. If I were to meet one celebrity, it would be this individual. Don't know who that is. You can ask me about it later. And a fun fact about me, I have a 2,650-day learning streak on Duolingo, German, by the way. I think it's a fun fact. Obsessed with Duolingo. Happy to talk about it a bit more. But I think more than anything today, what I want to talk about is just how we as compliance leaders need to really rethink our compliance strategies in light of who today's learner is. Like I mentioned, all the things in our digital lives inform our want to versus have to. And we need to still figure out how we negotiate the have to in the workplace and what people are trying to do with their careers in a world where they primarily are used to want to. All right, we are out of the gate and we don't have a lot of time. So I just want to give you 25 minutes Ooh, that's a lot. That's not a long time, but 25 minutes to leave you with more confidence, more than anything, in your compliance strategy. I know that content is a big deal when we're thinking about compliance solutions. So, really specifically, how to manage your content strategy in a really great way. And we've kind of wrapped it in our traditional sponge, high energy storytelling way in 5.5 rules. What's the half rule? You'll have to stick around to the end to find out. I'm also a new dad. She is 1 year old as of 5 days ago. So I've got at least one dad joke to share with you if we have time. But let's get going, shall we? Rule number one, ground your strategy in behaviors, not knowledge. And I think the way that we need to look at it is this. This is from our friends over at Fosway, really talking about the top priorities for learning strategy for the year ahead. And look at what's number one there. And I think the key takeaway over here is that compliance and regulatory solutions just make up a big part of our day to day. It just consumes a big part of our day to day. And from everything that I know in talking with talent leaders, compliance leaders, learning leaders, is that they want to be more strategic. They just don't know how to when they're so consumed with what they need to do. And the piece for me that I keep coming back to is, well, then make strategy as part of your everyday, but it needs to be grounded in the right place. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if anyone's really interested, happy to talk about it at length. This is our internal model that we use for learning strategy. We call it the 3 E's: environments, experiences, and evidence. But I don't want to talk too much about that, but rather want to talk about the things that are happening outside of this model. When you understand where the business is today and where it's trying to go, what is the key compelling question, something we think about very carefully? What is the key compelling question that's actually going to propel the business to where it wants to go? And the reason why I mentioned that you want to ground your strategy in behaviors and not knowledge is, think about the limits of what compliance knowledge does to get to where the business is trying to go. Rather, focus on what the behaviors are needed to what you're trying to answer for the business. Behaviors like ethical decision-making culture, a safety-oriented culture, where there are metrics tied to what that looks like and what the success of that looks like. And when we beholden our compliance strategy to just knowledge, we tend to have a bias towards content, or what we would call experiences, when really it's the combination of those things that help answer what we call that compelling question. And what that compelling question needs to be grounded into the behavioral change that you're trying to achieve. So strategically speaking, if you know that you're going to spend so much of your time focusing on compliance solutions, make sure that they have an end outcome of behavioral change rather than just knowledge outcomes. Number two, compliance training is a moment, but compliant behavior is a journey. I know it's easy to think of compliance as your compliance training strategy as a sort of a turnkey solution. Assign courses, ensure they're completed. But that's only really taking care of kind of the liability risk. And I'll talk about this in a second, but that's kind of looking at your compliance strategy as sort of the insurance policy version of your strategy. Don't get me wrong. Courses are an important part of what you're trying to do with your strategy, but understand that it's just a moment in what should be a proper compliance journey. And I think one of the best ways to illustrate this is something from Osher and Gottfredson, the idea of time to competency and how long it actually takes an individual to get to a place where you want them to be. And if you look at sort of this green wave here, I think we're really good at ramping up people to the peak of that green mountain that you see there. Getting people that filling the vessels full of knowledge and then saying, off you go. But if you think about it, this is a journey. And we're just getting started. And if you think about the idea that, progress is not linear, as an example, how do we help people across this entire journey and not just ramping them up to the start of their journey? We need to remember here that the goal is compliant behavior, not just knowledge of compliance facts. So there's a component here of having the right content is important to your strategy, but it's the beginning of the journey and not necessarily the journey itself. And this is where something like learning journeys really come in handy here. Because when I think of learning journeys, I think of space. Space to experiment, space to forget, perform, fail, succeed. We need to have that space in there. Why? Because, well, learning is messy. And it needs to be a little bit messy because that is actually how we truly learn. And so when you trade this off with sort of that one-off content focused moment, you don't have enough space for the learner in preparation for that compliance moment, that performance moment. So think about how in the course of your journey, you can put in different plot points so that when they arrive at their actual performance moment, they feel empowered to get there rather than just being isolated at the start. It doesn't need to be a heavy lift. That's the other thing too. As long as it feels multimodal, as long as you're thinking beyond a course, it could be mini gamified simulations, it could be point of need resources, it could even be AI enablement. So even having sort of a co-pilot or a bot to help you closer into the performance moment. Think about what your journey is in terms of getting your people on a compliance journey, and think of how you can do that in a way that isn't just a course. And this is really important when how we're thinking about our compliance strategy, because I honestly believe that our tactics do ultimately dictate our outcomes and our strategy. And when we're coming back to our first point there about where we want to ground our compliance strategy, our tactics tell us a lot about what we actually think we're going to achieve. So if we have a bias towards just courseware, or if we think that stickiness and the way of getting stickiness is essentially through engagement and one-off training, well, that's that insurance policy component to developing your compliance strategy, where really the outcome is liability protection. Take this, read this, sign this, and all of that's on you to make sure that I just made sure that you signed the thing, and I'm protected from a corporate standpoint, but not necessarily enabled you to deliver on the culture that we're trying to build. Now, contrast that with, well, journey-driven learning. And the definition of stickiness there is not about engagement, but rather relevance. I'll talk about that more in a second. And rather than one-off training, it's more about moment of need support. I would call this the business accelerator compliance strategy, where the goal is not liability protection, but rather about building a culture of ethical decision making. And I think everyone here in the room can be aligned that that's really what we're trying to do, despite our efforts and knowing, of course, that sometimes we are in highly regulatory environments where that liability protection piece, that checkbox training does need to happen. But how do we make that shift towards more of a business accelerator where your compliance strategy doesn't just seem like something tactical and in the moment, but rather that can actually add transformational value to what the business is trying to accomplish? This is the value of grounding things in behaviors rather than just knowledge. But it's a journey. And I thought it would actually be good to get a quick poll from the group over here to say where you actually are on that journey. So I shared with you sort of the insurance policy versus the business accelerator component. That's probably a continuum, but if you could vote by a choice of your emoji, where you sit on that scale, would love for you to take a quick minute there, and I'll check as well too in the chat. Pick the emoji of your choice. Is an insurance policy working for your organization? Do you do a lot of one-off training? Are you trying to be more of a business accelerator? Or do you feel like you actually, we've got a pretty strong compliance culture? All right. Got a lot of momentum towards trying. Definitely agree. And I think we're all in the right place in order to do that. Cool. Well, great to see that an insurance policy isn't working for your organization, because I think then we have strong alignment here that no, how do we make this more of a business accelerator? Look at that. We're halfway through, guys. Can you believe how quickly we're moving on over here? That's why we got to move on to number 3 of our rules. Now, this one might be a little bit confrontational and a little bit controversial, but spoiler alert, relevance is far more important than engagement. I know. Hear me out. I know this sounds a little bit sacrosanct, but as compliance leaders, we tend to obsess over making content engaging and making sure that it's fresh and that it's not boring. But I think engagement can sometimes be a vessel for stickiness, as I mentioned. And if stickiness is the goal, relevance is a much better solution to get that stickiness than engagement. And maybe as a quick example, in the holiday spirit, it would be good to do sort of a holiday theme poll. Now, I mentioned, and this is an informal poll, so feel free to not participate if you don't want to, but I mentioned off the top all of those different services. We probably all have some form of a Facebook or an Instagram or some sort of social media piece in our lives. And the question for you, and potentially an embarrassing question is, but have you or a loved one ever bought something embarrassing or regrettable based on a targeted ad? Just going to take a quick peek for anyone that has anything to divulge there. Let me tell you, I certainly have a few loved ones in my life that have bought something on a targeted ad. I certainly think of some of those Facebook ones that, say, oh, my other car is an instructional designer or something like that as well too, but something kind of kitschy and funny and weird. And the reason why I say this is, first of all, to make a little bit of a gag, but secondly, because it's a good testament to how relevance finds a way through versus just engagement. And the fact that we know that it's a targeted ad and that eventually it gets to us and eventually says, hey, you know what, that is something that I need. That is something that I want, is a good example of the merging of the world of have to versus want to content and how that actually blends together. Now, I'm not going to speak to the sophistications of algorithms that get us to that place of wanting to get to a purchase, but it just goes to show you in the world that we live in, relevance has a much higher success rate than just engagement alone. And just to contrast that with sort of a traditional model of how we get from the learning moment to the performance moment, in that one-off event model, with just that one training, by the time you get to the performance moment, it's anyone's guess because you're so far removed, and whether forgetting might come into play, whether you understand the vision of what's going on. And so you're already not putting your learners in a position to succeed by just having this one-off key moment and then saying the performance moment, which might happen months down the line, to say this is what you're expected to do. Contrast that with a much more higher relevance model, where maybe you've got a team meeting as a follow-up after that key content event, or your manager follows it up, or there's a mini gamified solution, or you have executive endorsement, and there's a continuous sort of drip campaign through newsletters. As you can see here, there's no heavy lifting. It's actually mixed modality. It can be small touch, light touch. It doesn't need to be a big moment. But the whole point is relevance and persistency, because by the time you arrive there, and let's say you're supported with the right ecosystem of people and resources, you're in such a better moment to perform and adhere to that compliance moment by having more relevance in your journey there than just having that one-off moment. And so the key here is to be ruthlessly relevant. Seek to be relevant to your org's mission, to your flow of work of your people, their moment of need, to even what your team's goals are, and people's personal journey and consequences. There is so much to be relevant to there in terms of getting the context right. Because when you get the context right, the content just flows quite naturally. And this is the key part about grounding your strategy in behaviors, is that as long as you don't over-index on engagement and focus on the core of your message and being persistent with that, that is how you get true behavioral change. And you only get true behavioral change with persistence. So when relevance is right, engagement takes care of itself. And I think this is the part, not to necessarily say that engagement isn't important. Engagement is definitely important. But if you think of engaging content as the goal, engagement is just transitory. It just happens in that moment, whereas relevance is persistent. So think about that in sort of the levers that you're pulling in what we're trying to do in building a journey, even the parts that have content in it. Yes, you can have engaging content, but know that relevance is how you're actually going to win over hearts and minds. Which brings me to probably the biggest relevance filter that you can think about. And this is something that I'm certainly very passionate about. And that is getting your org story right. So let's say you've got great content. It hits all the requirements of what, but have you led with a compelling why? And you really have to get the why right when we're operating in the compliance world, because that kind of grounds everything. It's important that our people understand just the stakes involved as to what we're trying to do and why it's so important. And when we're thinking about compliance and behaviors, we're really just talking about change management. And change starts with belief. And people really need a reason to believe in order to go down an authentic path of change. And this is so important in how we execute our compliance strategy here, is that it's not just about putting information in front of people, it's about authentically grounding them into why that information and the start of their journey is so important. But let's take that largely holistic message and actually put it into something quite tactical. I'm a big fan of this quadrant grid that you see here from our friends at Red Thread Research. They've got a great way of laying out your content strategy into kind of a cross section of four components: specific content versus generic content, and durable content versus perishable content. Now, you likely have quite a bit of content that's aligned more towards the bottom right there, whether it's regulatory stuff, off-the-shelf courses, stuff that is necessary as part of your repertoire for content. But I think the argument that I want to make is that there's still a durability tied to your org message. And if you're thinking about building a culture of compliance and not just delivering content on its own, it needs to be grounded in much more durable messaging. And this is where authentic organizational storytelling really comes into play here. That is no matter how generic or perishable the content may be, the durability of your org story is what needs to be told well. So what are the aspirational qualities of fulfilling your compliance obligations? What's the journey we're on? What are the hopes? What are the fears? Get your leadership involved as well too. What do they have to say on the matter? Why do they care so much? Why is this particular moment of compliance adherence, culture of compliance, so important to where the organization is trying to get to? Build in that storytelling, because that durable message is how you activate the rest of your content. And I can't stress this enough. And certainly in our world of highly curated things and the things that we want, authenticity matters more than ever. So bring a highly human touch to it. Think about, and this is, I would say the Red Thread folks call it a crown jewel. I would say a marquee moment. What's the marquee moment in your compliance journey for your people where they really get the why? They really get the story of what's going on, so that all the information, all the knowledge that comes through it afterwards is just suddenly activated. Think about a moment of connection. And this doesn't need to be a heavy lift. It could be as simple as following up that course that starts at the beginning of your journey, if it needs to be there, following that up by simply having your manager bring everyone face to face and having a quick meeting about it. What did you think? How did that resonate with you? A moment of connection, social learning, activation. Getting people to talk about things is so important in how we activate cultures of compliance and putting them on the journey. And this is really important for your content strategy. No doubt you probably have off-the-shelf components to your compliance strategy. Those pieces where maybe it doesn't need to be grounded in the specific knowledge of your organization, but rather it can be a bit more turnkey. That's an essential part of your strategy. But don't leave those off-the-shelf courses hanging out to dry. If you ground those into a proper durable message, all of a sudden those start to sing and those start to shine. So think about the relationship between your off-the-shelf content, your more generic content, your more perishable content, vis-a-vis the durable messages that will always need to linger. I'm at pace over here, so I'm going to keep going. I just wanted to share with you a quick client example, actually, from a major pharma company that we worked with, talking about storytelling and getting it right. What we did there, because their values mattered so much to what they were trying to do as being a science-based organization to help, their patients, their end users save their lives. What we did was grounded our compliance solutions directly in their values. And so there was this great contrast here of making values-based decisions and challenging learners with real life scenarios that really said, how do those value-based decisions work? And the piece here that I think is most relevant is that when we were getting impact and receiving this from the team, they said, and the people who took this said, that this was the most authentic and relevant learning experience they've ever seen on this topic. And that matters in the compliance journey. Yes, we know we need to get to that essential information. We know we need to get to that essential knowledge. But how you do that in an authentic way really does make all the difference. All right, we are nearing the end here, and let me get you to the last 1.5 that needs to be done. This one is kind of more matter of fact, but I think it is really important in terms of how you manage time. We know SMEs are critical in executing our compliance strategy, but they are also supremely busy people. Typically, certainly from our side of the conversation, this is their second, third responsibility on top of their day jobs. And so just really make sure that you're leveraging their specific strengths. Stick to them being able to validate the knowledge and unlock compliant behaviors. And don't put too many onerous tasks on them. They don't need to be a learning expert. They don't need to feel pressure about whether this needs to be a 5-minute training or a 15-minute training. Surround your SMEs with learning experts to help them do that so that they can focus on the accuracy of the knowledge. Keeping them focused on subject matter is just what their role is, and they will thank you for it. So focus on the SM part rather than the E part and asking them to be an expert on everything, when really what we need them to do is just make sure that the content is accurate and their great knowledge is being imparted into the solutions that need to be created. So that was 5 rules. But of course, it's the holiday season, and I'd be remiss if we didn't leave you with a little bit of a gift, which is our half rule here. And that is, don't obsess over microlearning. This isn't a rule as much, hence why it's a half rule, as much as it's just more of a watch out. Microlearning is the term that gets thrown around quite a lot, and we tend to obsess over the format of it, of the duration of it. But if you ask me, not everything needs to be broken down to tiny chunks. And good design, good learning design is as long as it needs to be, plain and simple. So if you were to ask me what's the right amount for building X, we'll figure that out together. But don't get too hung up on whether it needs to be 2 minutes or 5 minutes. Uninspiring content is uninspiring content, no matter if it's an hour long or if it's 5 minutes long. So if you get the context right, as I mentioned before, the content will flow and the format of that content will flow as well too. So don't get too hung up on it. Yes, we want to develop engaging content, ideally in shorter bites, but don't design to a time duration because there's so much more that we need to get to beyond that. All right, folks, we are reaching the end of our time somehow, which is a little bit crazy, but I do want to let you know that actually there's a lot more. There's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more to discover. There's actually 4.5 more rules. And here's a quick preview of them. If what you heard today struck a nerve with you or got you excited about something or taught you something new that you didn't necessarily know before, we'd love to share the other rules with you. And here's a quick preview of them. Got a lot to say on the matter. But we only had a half hour today. Hopefully that was a good half hour of your time. By all means, please feel free to get in touch with me, get in touch with us. This is something we're super passionate about. We've got lots of case studies to share with you. We've got lots of client stories to share with you. But hopefully today you walked away with some tactical tips that can really help take your compliance strategy to another level. I'm just going to take a quick look at the chat to see if there's any last second questions. I'm seeing Saldi's AI prompt machine has given us a good little summary there. Thank you, Otter. Appreciate your time for that. Okay, I don't think I see any other questions there. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Enjoy your holiday season. Hope you've got a targeted ad that's got something that you want along your way. And thanks for joining. And as I mentioned, I'll leave these 10 rules up just to give you, if you want a quick sort of screenshot of it as well too. We've got lots more to talk about over there, but thanks for joining us.